If you've been around for a while, then you know how much I care about financial freedom for all. One thing that often gets in the way of that is debt. That's why I'm happy to announce that I've partnered with an amazing organization called Juno. Juno helps you get lower interest rates by using the power of group negotiation. It is a completely free resource that you can use to secure lower interest rates on new and existing student loans. Head to the link in the episode show notes to find out more. This is the Dreamers Podcast, episode 41, with Jackie Cummings Koski. Today is October 26, 2021.
If you want to reach financial independence, think about what your why is. And that was something that was big for me. So the motivation was there because I knew my why before I even started. And so think about if you didn't have to go to work, what would your day look like? What would you want to do? What would be your impact on this world to make it a better place? Just think big.
Hello, world. Welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I am Stephanie Anne-Lyse, also known as Anne-Lyse Wealth. I'm a financial coach and an author. I self-published my first book, Dream of Legacy, a guide to help dreamers reach financial independence and build generational wealth. In this podcast, I'll have conversations with experts and thought leaders who dare to follow their dreams. You'll hear about their journey and their money stories. I hope it inspires you, dreamers out there, to live life on your own terms.
Come on, dreamers, let's change the world!
This podcast is brought to you by Dream of Legacy. Check out dreamoflegacy.com for resources to assist you on your journey to financial independence. Before we get into today's episode, please take a couple minutes to go into Apple Podcasts if you're listening from an Apple device to rate and review the podcast. If you appreciate the free resources that are provided in this podcast, then the best way to let me know is to do just that. Reviews help the podcast be more visible and it helps other dreamers discover the podcast. So thank you. I appreciate you. And now let's get back to today's episode. Welcome to the Dreamers Podcast. I'm your host, Anne-Lyse Wealth. I'm so happy that you've tuned in today for this episode with Jackie Cummings Koski. Jackie is a certified educator in personal finance and the author of the book Money Letters to My Daughter, which was the 2013 winner of an Excellence in Financial Literacy Education Award. You may have seen Jackie on CNBC's Closing Bell, in Forbes, Business Insider, People magazine, or other major publications. Jackie retired from a corporate job at 49 years old with a net worth of $1.3 million. She was a single mom and never earned six figures. What's interesting is that Jackie became more intentional about investing in her late 30s. We'll get into more of her story. Jackie is part of the F.I.R.E movement, short for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And at 49 years old, she retired from her job to focus on her work in creating a financial literate society. Here is Jackie Cummings Koski. Jackie Cummings Koski, welcome to the Dreamers Podcast.
Thank you, Anne-Lyse. I am happy to be on the show today. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely a pleasure to have you. Can you tell the dreamers a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, my name is Jackie, and I actually grew up very poor in the South, ended up going to college right afterwards, went into the corporate world. I got married, had a daughter, and I ended up getting divorced, and that changed the whole trajectory of my life. And a few things happened that sparked my interest in personal finance and financial literacy. The only problem was I was working a corporate job and didn't know how on earth I was going to do that. And so finally, I figured out how to do it. So I reached financial independence and I retired from my corporate job in 2019. I was in my 40s still. And now I'm doing what I love, financial literacy and education.
And so you retired at 49 as a single mom, right?
Yeah, 49.
I read an article about you in Forbes, and you mentioned there that you weren't intentional about aggressively investing towards your retirement until your late 30s. So,
Yeah, I think I was 38 when I was just waking up. It didn't mean that I wasn't doing anything, but proactively and consciously knowing what I was doing with my money, I was about 38.
I really, really enjoyed your story because it's a story of hope. It shows that if you go through trials in life, if you don't give up, you can still change the outcome. And it's incredible that you've been able to retire at 49.
Yeah, thank you for that, Anne-Lyse. You're totally right.
Can you share the background story of how you started to take investing in your retirement more seriously?
Yeah, I think the biggest wake-up call was at the time of my divorce, because at that time, as you go through splitting up all the assets, the only real asset we had was our retirement accounts. And we're in our 30s at this point. But I realized that there was a huge disparity in what I had saved for retirement in my 401k and what my husband had. I had $20,000 and I thought I was doing great, but my husband had $120,000. So he had $100,000 more than me. And at least I felt so vulnerable, so ignorant about what was going on with our finances. And I'm like, why on earth is this so different? And we were making close to the same amount of money. And I thought we were putting away the same, but there was a few things he was doing different. And so from that moment on, I vowed to myself that I would learn about investing, personal finance, managing my money. And I never, ever wanted to feel like that again.
And so you were 39 at the time, and 10 years later, you were able to retire.
Yeah, it was right at 10 years. But like I said, it wasn't that I wasn't saving anything before 38, 39. I just didn't quite know what I was doing. I just did the match, like you were told. I had an emergency fund, but it just all, especially the retirement money, it just felt like it was so far away that I didn't even consider it mine. And I didn't understand the power of compound growth and how your money was growing in the stock market and things like that until I was in my late 30s.
And one thing that's interesting about your story is that you were able to do that without ever making six figures, correct?
Yeah, I never made more than $100,000. I think the highest, I went back and I looked at my Social Security earnings statement online, and my highest earning year, I think, was like around $95,000. But I'm in sales, so my salary kind of fluctuates. So during that time, I had years where I only made $65,000. It just depended on, what kind of year I was having and what the variable compensation looked like.
For anyone listening, Jackie went from 20,000 to 1.3 million in 10 years. So I think some of the dreamers are probably intrigued at this point and wondering, what is this FIRE movement that you talk about? Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah. So FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And I had never heard of it either until probably 2014, I think. I had already been interested in personal finance. Like right after my divorce, I joined an investment club. I started understanding and not being afraid of investing. After I joined the investment club, I did start maxing out all of my retirement accounts because I learned the value of investing, but it still really didn't all make sense to me, right? So finally, when I started listening and seeking out more about how do I put all this together, right? How do I understand the strategy behind how all these pieces come together? Because I was looking to do something different. And the personal finance space started sort of having these little subsets, right? And one of those subsets was FIRE, Financial Independence and Retiring Early. That was a group of people and a movement that was very interesting to me because they were making things very simple. And they were helping me put all the pieces together to figure out how all of this is going to work for me. Because a lot of the voices they didn't look like me. They were maybe a married couple that were both earning six figures. So I had to make adjustments and tweaks for me as a Black single mom. With the FIRE movement, they would cover things like, okay, here's a simple way to save for your retirement. Here's how you can get money out of your retirement account before you turn 59 and a half. So all the little roadblocks that I had in my head about why I couldn't retire early, they were all answered by someone in the FIRE movement, and it was just removing obstacles along the way that kept me from really following my dream and being able to do what I wanted to do and having the financial part figured out.
So what are some of the resources that really were helpful to you during that journey?
Well, I would say one of my favorite was the Mad Scientist. I just liked the way that he wrote, and he was very clear in what he was explaining, and he would have infographics. And I would say in general, I was just always attracted to someone that was willing to share their numbers in a transparent way. Because since I wasn't in the same exact situation as them, I mean, I would learn from them and I was happy to listen to them or whatever, but I knew that I had to make adjustments for my situation. And I didn't know what adjustments to make if you didn't, provide your numbers or gave me a little something to go on. It was very helpful for me to look at others, see what they were doing. I loved details. I loved numbers. And that helped me to be more detailed about putting my own plan together and where I needed to make adjustments.
Speaking of numbers, how did you determine your FIRE number? How did you know how much you needed to retire early?
Yeah, so that was, of course, a big question of mine, too. I had no idea what I needed at first. And by the time I found the FIRE movement, basically what they use, and anyone can use this, and here's why it works. So you want to look at 25 times your expenses, not your income, but your expenses. That's going to get you enough of a nest egg so that on the back end, once you do retire and you need to take money out, you can take out a certain percentage every year. Now, there's a popular study called the Trinity study that uses that 4% rule. Most people may have heard that at some point, but these days people think maybe that should be 3% or 3.5% or it should be lower. But also remember, when you are retiring early, to me, your most important asset is human capital, your ability to still make money. Like being so young, there are things you're still going to want to do. You define retirement. No one defines that for you. And so the 25 times your expenses so that on the back end, you can take off 3% a year, 4% a year, whatever number you determine. And that sets you up to FIRE and be able to live off of your assets and your investments.
I'm so glad you pointed out the human capital aspect that you can actually leverage after your quote unquote retirement. Because I think a lot of times when people hear about financial independence, retire early, some people might be thrown off by the retire early part. So I'm just curious to know, obviously you retired from your full-time job, but can you talk about what FIRE has done for your life? Like, what do you do now?
Yeah. So for me, and everyone is different. So I would always encourage people to look for their why. What lights you up? What does your life look like after you retire? Because I spent at least 2 or 3 years figuring that out. Now, the answer was already there for me because I started having this passion for financial literacy and financial education. And then I finally acknowledged that I had this big dream of creating a financially literate society, especially for those that grew up in poverty like I did, in people in underserved communities and things like that. For me, my corporate job didn't have anything to do with that. So there was really no way for me to do both. And I was pulling double duty for a while where I was working my corporate job and I was doing my financial literacy stuff. Finally, FIRE was the thing that came into my life that helped me see a way where I could retire super early from my corporate job and follow my dreams. And one other thing I love since I've retired is that now my mind has freedom to roam and to think about what I really want to do and take time to imagine. And I just never really felt like that before. So one of the first things that I started doing after I retired was I started a master's program. And that program is personal financial planning and financial therapy. And the financial therapy part is the most fascinating because I've always been super interested in the behavioral and emotional side of money. I think that gets ignored so much. So that's a part that I'm working on, kind of working on myself there, but I still do different financial education sessions. I do financial literacy work, a number of different things that I get to choose myself. And some of that I'm even doing it through the school that I'm going to currently.
During those 10 years when you were more aggressive in terms of investing, can you share how much you were investing on average every year?
Oh, absolutely. So I got to the point, like I said, where I was comfortable with the stock market. I knew that in order to grow your wealth, you have to have your money invested. And for me, that was the stock market because I enjoyed the stock market. And so that was my way. Some people do real estate or other things. I basically started maxing out all of my tax advantage accounts because not only did I get the benefit from the growth of the money being in the stock market, but I benefited from the tax treatment of these accounts. So that's getting two things for one. I started maxing out my 401k, which during that 10-year period, it was between like $18,000 and $19,000 a year. I was maxing out my health savings account to the family max because it was me and my daughter. So that ended up being maybe $6,000 to $7,000 a year. And then I was maxing out my Roth IRA, and that was about $5,000 to $6,000 a year during this period. So if you add all of that up, that is what I was saving. And then I was probably saving another maybe $200 a month in after-tax investing. That added up pretty quickly. And so all of that money is going to work for me. And that's how much I was saving.
And so what were you investing in? I know you said the stock market, but what type of strategy did you have in the stock market?
Yeah, well, I really kept it simple for the most part. Now, I like investing in individual stocks, some, but primarily I am in just straight up stock market index funds. And I used to, in my 401k and other accounts, pick and choose the different funds I would be invested in and try to get 3 and 4. Like I felt like I was somehow doing a better job if I had more than one fund. But I ended up just saying, you know what? All I really need is a single, for where I was in my life, one or maybe 2 stock market index funds, meaning low fee, covering the stock market, giving me the diversity that I feel like I needed if I want to be in the stock market. So I would always look and pick something as close to either an S&P 500 index fund or total stock market index fund. I mean, my go-to index fund for the stock market is VUG, which is simply a Vanguard total stock market growth fund. And I mentioned an investment club. So the investment club is all about individual stocks. And I'm kind of like a nerd like that, where I love analyzing companies. I love looking at the 10Ks, the 10Qs, and listening to the earnings calls and things like that, and looking at, do they have, growing sales, growing earnings, and things like that. So I had a passion for learning about individual stocks and companies. I would say the breakdown, I probably have 80 to 85% in just the straight up index funds. And then I do have a portfolio of individual stocks, both in my personal portfolio and then what I have with my investment club. I'm still with that investment club, by the way. That's probably been about 11 years now.
You mentioned tax advantage retirement accounts. Did you do anything in like brokerage accounts?
I did a little bit in after tax, and I consider them after tax, but those would be brokerage accounts. So that would be what I had in the investment club, no special tax treatment, not for retirement or anything. And then I had sort of, I guess, a taxable brokerage account that was to the side. And that was just a small amount, but most of it was in some type of tax advantage accounts. And once I learned about how it was possible to take money out of those accounts, even before 59 and a half, I was all about it. But I do have a little something in brokerage accounts.
And that's definitely something that I would love for you to kind of like walk us through, because, in those retirement accounts, you hear if you take money out before 59 and a half, you have to pay a penalty. So obviously you're not 59 and a half. Do you mind sharing kind of like your strategy there?
Yeah, I used to always think, Anne-Lyse, and I don't know if you did as well, that you had to be 59 and a half in order to take money out of these retirement accounts. Now, one of the things that I learned from the F.I.R.E movement is that there are several ways to be able to take money out or get money out of your retirement account without being 59 and a half. So that was a knowledge bomb for me. I mentioned 3 main types of accounts, right? 401k, Roth IRA, and health savings accounts. So with the health savings accounts, that's in no way attached to an age or even an income. But I grew that pretty big. I started my HSA as soon as my company started offering them. And now that HSA is worth like over $160,000. So that's pretty significant. And what I've done over the years, I've not taken money out of it, because if I have expenses, medical expenses, I have simply saved the receipt digitally. So I can reimburse myself at any time. So if I got $10,000 worth of medical expenses over the last 10 years, I can take that money out free and clear, no tax or anything. And I just have to include, all the information in my taxes for that year. So that I can take out at any time. And a lot of financial issues come from medical things that happen. So that gave me a little more peace of mind. The other really important account that is pretty flexible before 59 and a half is your Roth, whether it's a Roth IRA or 401k. Of course, when I left the company, I did a split between traditional 401k and Roth. So when I left, I can move that Roth 401k portion to a Roth IRA. But either way, the Roth IRA, you're always able to take out your contributions at any time for anything, both tax and penalty free. Now, this is not your earnings. This is the contributions, the money that you put in. That became available to me. I've had my Roth IRA for 15 years, and then I was putting some in, I had some Roth money in my 401k. So once I rolled that over, the contribution portion of that, I have access to. So once I learned all these things, it was just removing obstacles and making it more real to me and more doable to know that I don't have to wait until I'm 59 or 62 or 70 or whatever I thought that number was before. So those are some of the strategies that I would use. And then I have the money in my investment club and of course, in a taxable brokerage account. So knowing all of these things, it definitely helped relieve any anxiety about being able to get to whatever funds I needed to cover my bills.
Yeah, I'm so glad you touched on that. So you retired in late 2019.
Yes.
And then the market crashed in
oh gosh
2020. So I'm curious to hear how you prepared for such an event.
Oh gosh, that was an interesting time because who would have expected the pandemic? But on top of that, I'm retiring and I just gave up my great job, right? Now, I have no regrets. However, it was a weird year and I didn't know if it was because of the pandemic or because it was my first year of retirement. So yeah, probably a little bit of both for sure. And then I started school that year as well. So for me, what I did, again, not knowing that the pandemic was coming, thinking about things that I knew was happening or going to happen. So I knew that I would no longer have my job. Okay. I no longer had a paycheck coming in. So I had to create my own paycheck. So that meant that I could not have 100% of my money in the stock market. Again, learning everything that I learned about the stock market. The stock market does a correction about every 8 to 10 years, where the last time we had a major correction, before 2020 was back in 2008, 2009, right? So we were way overdue for a market correction. And that played on my mind a little bit. I ended up, this was my number that I felt comfortable with, was 3 years of expenses in cash out of the stock market. So for me, my annual expenses were somewhere between like $40,000 and $45,000 a year. So I made sure I had at least that much that was liquid to live on. So even if the market did take a dive, now, of course, I had no idea at this point, but even if the market took a dive, I didn't want anything to get between me and my early retirement. Having that cash on hand turned out to be a great move because at the end of 2019, I think that year, the S&P 500 was up 30-something% in 2019. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I just missed out on 30%. Yeah. I was thinking I was missing out, but I had to do what I needed to do for myself. And again, I still got a ton of money in the stock market, but I only felt comfortable by having these 3 years worth of expenses ready to go that had nothing to do with the stock market.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a great lesson that, sometimes it's not about maximizing your profit every time, right? Sometimes you just have to make the best decisions. And it turns out that for you, it worked out great, right? So I can't imagine
you gotta
being all in the stock market when that happens and you just retired.
Yeah. And, you got to be able to sleep at night. There's that behavioral and psychological side that, you have to be okay. So that's what made me feel better. Yeah, I probably felt like, dang, I missed out on 30%, but that was only on a very small portion of my investments. The vast majority was still in the market going to work.
So let's talk about your book, Money Letters to My Daughter. What inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, that will probably be one thing that I'm most proud of. Like, it wasn't a New York Times bestseller. I wasn't planning on selling millions of copies, but it was this very special gift to my daughter. It was definitely a labor of love. So right after I'd gotten divorced, that's a really tough time for, both parents and the child. And so as I'm getting myself together financially, I'm learning so much. And as parents, when we learn something, we don't want it to get lost on us. We want to try to pass it on to our kids. And for me, my major in college was communications and journalism. So I was always a writer and I enjoyed writing. Now that I knew that it was just much easier to get a book published, that was what I wanted to do for my daughter. So I started writing the book when she was about 14 years old. And I wanted to make this as simple as possible and to pass on all the money lessons I had learned over the years. And I knew at 14, she's probably not going to read it or anything, but I was thinking way longer term. Like, if I only sold one book and it was to her and her child one day, I was happy. That was a win for me. So my biggest, challenge was to write it in a way where she might read it. And so I started writing it in these just short letters that could be standalone. And I would sign it like financially savvy mom or mom that's just waking up, just these little cute letters that kept it kind of light, but it was still making the point to her. And I wanted to finish the book and give it to her as her high school graduation gift. So it took me a long time to write it. It took about 2.5 years. It was finished on time. I got it published, had the artwork done and all that stuff. And that was the gift that I gave her for her high school graduation. And, the book is still around now. And at that, right after I wrote it, I had a lot of schools asking me to come in and speak. And that's how my whole interest in financial literacy got started, because initially it was just, let me try to take care of my own child and educate my own child. But it turns out there's a lot of people that need this type of information and education. And if I happen to be one of the voices to do that, I want to do it.
That's amazing. So what are some of the most important lessons? You mentioned earlier before we started recording that your daughter was in her 20s. What are some of the most important money lessons you wanted her to learn at this stage of her life?
Yeah, there was a lot of them. And honestly, I'm kind of surprised at some of the things that stuck. I always encouraged her to do her research. Like, at the beginning of the book, I have a poem that includes a part that says, I will always try to educate before I give advice. And that means I want you to be able to do your research on your own, or I want to just give you the information. And I want you to be able to understand it well enough so that you can make your own decisions. Because if somebody's just telling you do this, do that, you might not even be learning anything. So that's an important part. And that flows through every aspect of it. So a couple of the big things, and we were just talking the other day about credit. For some reason, I didn't teach her this, but she didn't want a credit card. And she said, I don't want a credit card because I don't want to owe anybody. I just want my debit card because I know the money's there. And, that's just not something you hear from a 20-year-old, right? And I was kind of surprised. So she was 24 before she ever got her first credit card because she didn't want to owe anybody. So that mentality, I never really sat down and told her directly, but she gathered that and figured that out from all the other things she had learned about credit. But at that point, when she got her credit card, she knew exactly how to figure out her credit score. She knew what a credit report looked like, and she knew how to get her credit score. So she had all this information that she had known for at least a year or so and was, had a very clear understanding of it. And then she got a credit card.
So she did research then.
Yeah. And she did do her own research. And that made me really proud because sometimes she would come to me and she would say, oh, Mom, have you seen this app, Credit Karma? It's so cool. So I always love those teachable moments, even though she was showing me something I'd already known about Credit Karma. But as a mom, I'm going to continue asking questions and encourage her to explain to me what this is. And I'm like, oh, what does it show you? And she'll say, it shows your credit score. And then I would say, well, is it for all 3 bureaus? And she'll say, let me look. And she'll go and show them. So it's kind of neat to see all the light bulbs coming on for her. And she did the same type of thing when it came to investing, even though I had shown her all these different ways to invest and platforms to use like Schwab and Vanguard. She ended up getting an Acorns account. And she was so proud because she thought I didn't know about it. And she was showing me all these things. So I kept asking her questions and getting her talking. But it's just so amazing. You know, she's in a different generation. So the ways in which she learned things could be different in the way that I learned things. But she has the basics and she's willing to do her research.
So for any of the listeners who tuned into today's podcast and are very interested in just becoming financially independent, what are some of the steps that they can take to get started?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest part is the mindset part, right? And the behavioral part. If you want to reach financial independence, think about what your why is. And that was something that was big for me. So the motivation was there because I knew my why before I even started. And so think about if you didn't have to go to work, what would your day look like? What would you want to do? What would be your impact on this world to make it a better place? Just think big. And that could help start you on your journey or sort of be the wind behind you to say, okay, this is what I'm moving towards. So this excites me. This inspires me. So I would say that is probably the biggest piece, especially in the beginning. Even though you might not financially be even close, you can start creating your dream or imagining what your life looks like. And then once you do that, it just becomes more of doing some research. Or here's something that made a huge difference to me. So I wish I would have known this when I was in high school, but figure out how you learn the best, right? I mean, in school, we always had to read a book or read something. And I learned that I digest knowledge a lot better when I'm either listening or watching. So if YouTubing is your thing, find a YouTuber that resonates with you, that's talking about the stuff you want to hear about. You know, if you like podcasts, find someone that's podcasting that is talking about what you want to talk about. There's a ton of information out there, and it's just finding what speaks to you and what voices really resonate with you that you can understand. That starts to break things down. And from there, there's just so many resources. You know, if you Google FIRE, retiring early, you know, you'll start to, I think the journey is even something that can be enjoyable as well, like discovering new content creators, right? Like I was telling you, I discovered your podcast from a podcast that you were on. So it ended up sort of being this ball of yarn where I started discovering all these great creators. I mean, for me, the first person that kind of spoke to me that was specifically talking about FIRE was the mad scientist. He doesn't do a whole lot of content creation anymore, but there's who is your mad scientist? Like, who is that person? And it could be multiple people. And you learn from them. You know, if you've got someone that's being transparent and showing all of their numbers and being specific, that might be even more helpful than someone talking about very general things. That was my idea.
That sounds great. I think, a lot of times, we hear about know your why, and it might sound redundant, but it's so important when you're trying to do something that's like so different from what the rest of everybody else is doing. You're going to have to go back to your why when in moments of doubts, and also just finding people that you connect with, that you can learn from, that you feel comfortable learning from is key, because the information is out there. It's the same. It's just like, who do you understand it? Who do you trust most to deliver it to you in a way that will encourage you to keep going? So thank you so much for sharing that. Jackie, I'd like to end the interview with a round of rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's go.
Tell me about a book that changed your perspective on life.
Instead of a book, like I said, I like to listen and watch a lot of different platforms of different people. So I'll say a person that really has resonated with me that kind of changed my life, and that is Melody Hobson. So she is the president and CEO of Ariel Investments, which is one of the few Black-owned investment companies in the U.S. And she did this wonderful TED Talk on financial literacy several years ago, and I loved it. She talked about her journey growing up in poverty. She was raised by a single mom with 6 kids. I was raised by a single dad with 6 kids. And she wasn't afraid to talk about the fact that sometimes they got their lights turned off, got evicted. And fast forward to today, she is president and co-CEO of a very large investment firm. and doing all kinds of great things around financial literacy. So yeah, her TED Talk definitely spoke to me.
Talking about an inspiring story.
Yeah.
What's one thing about money you wish you could tell your younger self?
I mean, I wish I would have asked more questions. I didn't exactly have a lot of exposure to money when I was younger, but I just wish I would have asked more questions earlier. Sometimes I thought they were stupid questions or I didn't have anyone to ask. I feel like maybe I would have been a little more further along if I would have been more curious when I was young and willing to ask more questions.
What's the best investment in yourself you've made so far?
Probably retiring early. I will say that only because early on, I never dreamed that I would be able to spend the rest of my life fulfilling this dream of creating a financially literate society. And to have found a way to do that, it was life-changing for me.
Filling the blank in 3 words or less. Money to me is freedom and room to roam and do what I want to do. That's more than 3 words.
I know.
What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, one of my legacies was I did want to write that financial literacy book to my daughter, but I definitely want it to be around financial literacy and education, that I did my part in making the world a better place when it comes to learning about money and personal finance.
Jackie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with our listeners. Please tell everybody where to find you.
Oh, Anne-Lyse, this was wonderful. And thank you so much for having me. I am on all the social media channels. They can just look me up, my name, Jackie Cummings Koski. So I'm on, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and would love to connect with you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Dreamers podcast. You can find the episode show notes and all of the links mentioned at dreamoflegacy.com. If you liked today's episode, here's what you can do to support me and help more dreamers discover the podcast. Follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. Rate and review the podcast to help the podcast gain more visibility. Share the podcast with your family, friends, and coworkers. And if you really enjoyed today's episode, please take a second to tag me at thedreamers.podcast on Instagram and let me know what you liked about today's episode. All right, dreamers, that's it for today. I will see you back here next week for another episode of the Dreamers podcast.
Okay, dreamers, time to build this legacy.
This podcast is for general information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax, legal, financial planning, insurance, accounting, investment, or any other kind of professional advice or services. Please consult with an appropriate tax, financial, or legal professional to receive appropriate advice based on your situation.
Sunday, Skincare Day, is one of the ways I keep my sanity in these crazy times. DREAMER'S is an all-natural, Black-owned skincare brand carefully handcrafted by parents who could not find the proper care solutions to address their family skin problems. All DREAMER'S products are made of organic and high-quality ingredients, meticulously chosen to give your skin the smooth results and the glow it deserves.